Welcome to the November 4th, 2021 meeting of the Metropolitan Planning Commission. Welcome to all of you. My little note here says Brenda announces and records attendance. Has that already occurred?
Has not.
Okay, sorry, Brenda.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. So in order to make this easy, I'm just going to read off what I can see. And if I do not call your name, then I will ask for that after I finish calling roll. So Ellen Courier, and I'm not going to call you by title right now. Joe Burney, Webb Sussman, Bill Johnston, Andrew Martin, Caitlin Vargas, Dan Collister, Drew Pfefferly, Emma Newman, Franny Brindle, Garth Apanitis from DKS, Heather Buck, Kelly Clark, Matt Rodriguez, Lucy Venus, Megan Wimmer, Rachel Dorfman, Ray Smith, Rob Innerfeld, Sasha Vatarnian, Steve Moe, Sid Schoaf, Tom Schwetz, and we have someone on the phone with the ending 5201. I do believe that's probably the minutes recorder. Can you confirm that, please? Whoever is on the phone with the phone number ending in 5201.
This is Rob Zake.
Oh, great. All right. Thank you. I'm glad you could join us, Rob. All right.
Thank you. Little tech difficulties there, but I'm
That's
here.
okay.
Thank you.
Have I missed
Randy Groves.
anyone? Oh,
Randy Groves.
oh, hi. Sorry about that. Why are you not showing up? Anyone else? Let me go through this real quick. I do believe that's everyone. All right, Chair, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wilson. I'm now calling this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda, item 3, but it's still the first action item, approve the October 7, 2021 MPC meeting minutes. Anyone have any changes to the minutes before we get a motion? Councilor Moe. Councilor Moe, we can't hear you. Oh, well.
There I am. I reviewed 6 pages of minutes. Can anybody really remember what we said? But I make a motion that we approve it.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
The motion to approve the October 7, 2021 MPC meeting minutes has been made by Councilor Moe, seconded by Mayor Smith. Is there discussion to the motion? Seeing none and welcoming Mayor Van Gordon. All those in favor of this motion, please signify by both raising your hand and saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let the record show that the minutes have been unanimously approved. Thank you, Councilor and Mayor. Item number 2, adjustments to the agenda and announcements from MPC board members. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
Yes, there is. There is an addition to the agenda that was confirmed just this morning. So if I can, I would like to add right after item 6C, an item for a request from the City of Eugene for a grant letter of support. I and Eugene staff will provide details on that, but a new item D, a letter of support, City of Eugene.
Okay. I have misplaced the agenda. So this is what vice chairs are for. Vice Chair Groves, if you can call this item, I'll refine the agenda and take it up on the next one.
Yes, Chair. So now we're going to move on to comments from the audience. Anyone wishing to comment is asked to sign up on the public comment sheet provided at the meeting. A limit of 3 minutes per person is requested.
So at this time, if I may, there is one person that notified me ahead of time they would like to speak at this point, and that is Rob Zako. So Mr. Zako, if you would like to unmute and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Vice Chair Groves. Yes, this is Rob Zako, Executive Director of Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. And I just want to share this morning some news that you may have heard that is bittersweet. The Center for Appropriate Transport, or CAT, after 29 years, has shut down operations as a nonprofit promoting bicycle education, service, advocacy, and innovation. But through an arrangement with multiple parties, Best is going to be taking over the building that they have at 455 West First Avenue and actually taking over CAT's assets of a community bicycle repair shop. We're going to be leasing the space out to various nonprofits. Our first new tenant is going to be Cascadia Mobility, which is the operator of Peace Health Ride Bike Share. And that's just a start. We have big plans to create a community space here, 2 blocks from REI and the Whitaker, to promote all things sustainable transportation. We're calling it the Nexus for Eugene Sustainable Transportation, and are working with lots of partners, and you'll be hearing more about this. So we're really excited. I just want to share that exciting news with you this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm good now, if I may, Vice Chair.
Standing down.
Hey, thank God, Councillor Randy Groves is Vice Chair of this group. Paul, are there any other comments from the audience?
Chair, there are none that were notified me ahead of time. I will ask, although I don't see anybody connected right now, is there anybody else that would like to speak at this point?
Seeing and hearing none. Are there any MPC members that would like to respond to all those comments from the audience at this time? Yes, Mayor Venice.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to express my excitement and support about what Rob has just reported about Nest. I think it's a really terrific addition to our efforts to promote bike and alternative transportation. It's a great location. It's a great use of that building, and a wonderful piece of sort of collaboration and partnership. So really, really excited to hear that news update, and happy to see them established and doing the work they do. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'm going to back up. One of the items under 4 was, did any MPC members have any announcements for the committee? Well, heck, okay. In that case, we are now on item 6. Is that correct, Paul? Yep.
Yes, it is.
Metropolitan Planning Organization issues. A, Transportation Improvement Program Amendment Matrix. And I believe Dan Callister of LCOG is going to make this presentation.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. This is the Transportation Improvement Program Amendment Matrix. At last month's MPC, we had a public hearing and this item was presented. In summary, this is a revision to the categorization of project changes in the Transportation Improvement Program. Ultimately, the effect is that it's reducing the number of amendments that require federal approval. So it's streamlining some things. The public comment period was open for 30 days. It concluded October 31st. No comments were received, nor did we receive any comments at the public hearing last month. On October 21st, the Transportation Planning Committee reviewed this item and recommended MPC approve So the action that is recommended at this meeting of this body is to approve resolution 2021-06, which would amend the current Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program to update the amendment matrix in that document. That revised matrix is also attached for your information. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. MPC members, questions, comments, discussion? Anyone? If that's the case, is there a motion? Yes, Mayor Smith.
I motion that we approve resolution 2021-06, amending the fiscal year 2021-24 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mayor Venice. Well, it is resolution 2021-06, amending the FFY, which I presume stands for Federal Fiscal Year 2021-24 Metro Transportation Improvement Program, made by Mayor Smith, seconded by Mayor Venice. Is there discussion to the motion? My only discussion is I always find it interesting when staff works to remove barriers that other staff have created in order to process things smoothly. I know that's, forgive my glib comment, Mr. Callister. If there is no further discussion, we'll call a vote. All those in favor of approving resolution 2021-06, made by Mayor Smith, seconded by Mayor Venice, please signify by raising your hand and saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Let the record show that resolution 2021-06 has been unanimously approved by this body. Thanks, Dan. We're item 6B, draft regional transportation plan and congestion management process. This looks like a big one. The staff will present, and my understanding is that Kelly Clark of LCOG will present this for us. Ms. Clark.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure, is there time for public comment now, or is that the end, Paul?
First, please. Kelly, go ahead with the staff presentation.
Okay, thanks. So hi, I'm Kelly Clark. I'm a transportation planner with the Central Lane MPO at LCOG, and I'll present the draft regional transportation plan and congestion management process. And yes, as you can see, it's a hefty, several pages in here to go over, but
if I may, Kelly, I do apologize. This was my fault. So just so everyone knows, including you, we're going to have a staff presentation. Then we're going to open and conduct the public hearing. And then after we conduct the public hearing, then MPC members will comment, ask questions, and forgive me for not providing that context.
Quite all right. Thanks for clarifying. Also here today is Garth.
Oh. Councilor Grove, I'm sorry.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm hearing that some people are still having a hard time gaining access to this that want to be part of the public hearing. So I hope we are continuing to work on that situation.
Whoops.
If I may just say, we've confirmed that the call-in and the video links are correct and working. And I know that I had a contact that had a problem, but now is part of the meeting. So I see at least two other people that have joined. If there are others, please forward their information to me, counselor or others, and I will try and reach out to them.
Thank you, Paul. My information may be a little bit time lagged, but that's I received a text on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Is there anything else before we allow Ms. Clark to continue with the report? Not at this time. Please, Ms. Clark.
Thank you. So also here today, just so you know, is Garth Epinitis with DKS, the consulting firm that was helping us with this project. So Central Lane MPO is required by federal code to update our RTP, Congestion Management Process, or CMP, every 4 years. And those updates need to address the items within the code. So at its core, the intent is to ensure that the regional transportation plan continues to reflect the community it represents and plan for our transportation system to serve our community with all modes of travel through 2045. We started this update in March of 2020 and presented to MPC between May 2020 and April 2021. We introduced the project and received feedback and direction regarding the RTP's goals, objectives, and performance measures. And that direction really established our framework and is integrated throughout the rest of the documents and its multiple appendices. So today I'll share an overview of the RTP and the CMP, and appreciate any feedback from MPC, and so many acronyms, and our public comments. The RTP has a 2020 base year with a 2045 planning horizon. So we will refer to it as the 2045 RTP. And the cover memo does provide a summary of its chapters, but I wanted to touch on a few highlights from each chapter here. So chapter 1 is important in setting the context for our federal requirements, and it provides an overview of our multimodal transportation system that serves bicycle movement by transit, bicycle, walking, and other human-powered devices, as well as vehicles and freight movement. It also summarizes this project's public outreach, which included an online open house, a bilingual survey distributed by Downtown Languages, a travel barriers and benefits survey, which was presented to MPC in September 2020, discussions with regional advisory groups and committees, outreach to local community organizations, collaboration and coordination with our regional, state, and federal partners, and then MPC feedback and public comment through that process. Chapter 2 contains the RTP's goals, objectives, and performance measures. And this really is the foundation because it establishes where we see our region going and how we expect to continue meeting our needs to move for work, personal needs, and play. And it sets the transportation system's goals or desired outcomes and objectives, which provide the direction on how we want to achieve our goals, and then reflects what we will measure to evaluate our progress. The RTP overall is a major update from the one it's replacing, and the most important place you are seeing this change is in this chapter. It intends to reflect the feedback and the direction we have received throughout all of our public outreach and from MPC. And it also sets the stage in chapter 1 for our region's first RTP to have a performance-based planning and programming framework, which is a new federal requirement that I'll talk about a little bit more later. Chapter 3 provides a summary of the region's activity centers, including the University of Oregon and downtown Springfield and Eugene downtown. It also presents current and trending population and employment growth, demographics, and travel behavior. And our region is forecasted to continue growing in both population and in jobs. And our demographics will evolve over time, and the transportation system will need to keep pace. For reference, data and estimates are in this chapter are from 2018 and 2019, so not quite representative of what we're seeing as far as the COVID-19 impacts. So we'll continue to have available data as we do our next RTP update and subsequent ones to be able to evaluate those impacts and trends. Chapter 4 is the RTP's financial framework. Federal law requires that the planned transportation investments in the RTP are financially constrained, which means they're based on a reasonably foreseeable forecast of future revenues. We have more projects and anticipated revenue, which is typically the case with these types of plans. But the projects that we see reasonably anticipated to be funded with available revenues through 2045 are listed in this chapter. And those that are kind of beyond what we see able to fund are in Appendix J, and it's called our illustrative project list. This chapter also lists expected state, federal, and local revenue sources, which are pretty consistent with what we have seen historically, and then describes possible strategies to address our anticipated revenue shortfall, which is another strategy that we've used in past RTPs. And then chapter 5 provides the range of the plans, programs, and projects we've identified as needed to meet the needs of our region as we move through 2045 for both people and freight. The RTP is intended to support our local and state efforts, and so draws most of the projects and plans from our local partners' plans, including the transportation system plans. Chapter 5 does reinforce our regional priority to maintain and preserve the existing transportation system and protect the significant level of investments we've already made. It also prioritizes our goals of safety, equity, economic vitality, and support of bicycle, public transportation, and pedestrian modes of travel. I'd also like to mention that it introduces a few new planning projects that we identified through our public engagement process and influences from a few other places. The first is the development of a regional active transportation plan. The intent is to address some of the public comments we've received, but we're kind of outside of the RTP scope that what we could do with this project. And then to create a more regional approach towards our bicycle and pedestrian connections and terminology, the data that we have for it, and then our performance measures as well. And the second is a planning effort that could be potentially led by MPO staff to kind of further some of the efforts that have already taken place, but to identify and prioritize regional emergency transportation routes. And these routes provide connectivity to critical infrastructure, essential facilities, the statewide lifeline routes, population centers, and vulnerable communities. And the intent here is to kind of enhance our resiliency in the face of seismic activity. And it came kind of as an outcome of the need to address resiliency. In chapter 6 is where we see an analysis of how our projects move us towards achieving our goals. It's the keystone of our performance-based planning and programming framework, which is really intended to establish an effective way for us to understand the consequences and benefits of investment in planning or programming decisions. Like I said, this is a new federal requirement, and this is our region's first RTP to be developed with it. Through this process, we did find some limitations in implementing this framework and analyzing these measures. And as the cover memo notes, our region relies heavily on programmatic efforts like the Safe Lane Coalition and transportation options, as well as localized projects that are hard to really capture in a travel model that's at a regional scale. And so but these efforts do have a really high potential to produce positive outcomes and to steer the region towards our goals. But again, they're hard to quantify and measure, especially through 2045. So we'll continue to evaluate these measures and explore better tools to help us quantify them. Yet chapter 6 does show the analysis for each of these performance measures and indicates the projected outcomes implementing the RTPs, the fiscally constrained project list of the RTP. Overall, we're heading in the right direction, but as our region grows, vehicular travel related measures indicate movement to increased vehicle miles traveled, increased delay, and increased congestion. And then chapter 7 is a wrap up and it identifies a few of the upcoming legislation and trends and projects that we will be involved with and moving towards for our next RTP update, and just wanting to track and make sure we're aware of in general. A few of those are that our region is growing and changing in demographics, and that's going to have a big impact on how we plan. We're slowly emerging from a global pandemic, and its long-lasting impacts will present themselves over time. We're facing climate change with drastic ramification. We need to address historic inequalities in the distribution of benefits and burdens of the transportation system. And emerging technologies will continue to change the way we move and plan our cities. So that was a lot, but I also wanted to give a brief summary of our congestion management process document as well. Just in general, or brief, the CMP is required of MPOs our size, which are MPOs greater than 200,000. And it sets up a process to manage congestion and to improve our system's performance and reliability. And the strategies are really intended to reduce the negative impacts of vehicle congestion on the movement of goods and people and goods. And our CMP is in line with our regional goals. It prioritizes transportation options and travel demand management, operational improvements like intelligent transportation systems and transportation system management and operations. And we had just updated our intelligent transportation system. So it's a really nice tie-in with the strategies that we're working on in the RTP with what that plan provides. It also prioritizes transit operational improvements, freight operations movements, and all of this before we would consider roadway capacity improvements. So as I've said, the RTP and CMP are major updates from the ones that they're replacing, but they're really intended to reflect our community's values and direction and to also put us into compliance with our federal requirements. Just in summary, we opened the public comment period October 29th, and it will remain open through November 30th. And at their October 21st meeting, our MPO's Staff Advisory Transportation Planning Committee, TPC, there was a unanimous support of these draft materials. And we will work hard to continue to incorporate feedback we received during the public comment period into the next round of draft. And we intend to return to MPC in December to seek recommendation for approval of a resolution adopting these documents. That was a lot, I know, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chair?
Yeah.
If I may add just a couple of quick comments before we proceed.
Paul, you always say if you may, and then you continue to, so just presume, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that as blanket approval from here on out.
Yes.
So I just want to speak to the process a little bit. I know this is a lot of document, a lot of paper. It was a 995-page meeting packet. I was very tempted, I kept joking with staff, I was very tempted to repaginate things to break 100,000 pages, but I didn't. We have a process today that released these for public comment last Friday and is holding a public hearing today. We will take all the comments through today's public hearing and listen to your conversation and direction on those comments. After today, the public comment period remains open and we encourage the public to still submit comments. They are still very valuable. Comments received up until November 18th will be reviewed not only by the MPO staff, but by your Transportation Planning Advisory Committee. And that committee on November 18th will consider possible revisions to the draft based on public comments or any other factors in preparation of the draft that we will present to you in December. The public comment period remains open through November 30th, and comments received between November 18th and November 30th will be presented to you in a cover memo at your December 2nd meeting. When December 2nd comes, you will have a couple of choices. One is to adopt the RTP and associated documents as that draft as the draft presented to you in December reflects any changes, or two, you can put the adoption off in favor of additional discussion and public comments. We just want to note for the public that are listening today and that are concerned that there's not a lot of time for public comment on such a large packet, that there's still time for another 2 weeks before the advisory committee considers the final draft, and that there's still time throughout this month before we bring a packet to you for your December meeting. So I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. I think Ms. Clark's question was, did we have any comments on her presentation or questions for her? And after that, we will then open and conduct the public hearing. Are there any questions for Ms. Clark on which? Yes, Ms. Brindle.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question about when will this be updated next and how long? So like kind of the time period of, you know, the time that this is adopted and the time the next one will be started, the next RTP.
So under federal regulations, as a MPO that is under an air quality limited maintenance period, which we will continue to be through 2033, we are required to update the RTP at least every 4 years. The clock on that next 4-year period will start when the air quality conformity determination for this one is accepted by the US DOT. We anticipate that if you adopt in December, we anticipate US DOT accepting the air quality finding in January of 22. So that would mean we have to do the next update by January of 2026.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, and if I don't see you and you want to make a comment, just yell. I'm doing my best. Seeing none, we are now opening the public hearing on this item. And Paul, you are the moderator for this. Are there any members of the public that would like to provide comment at this time?
Chair, thank you. I have 3 people that notified me ahead of time that they wanted to speak during this public hearing. So if I may, or I guess I have approved, I will call on them in the order that they let me know. So first up would be Rob Zako.
Thank you, Paul. Chair, thank you, Chair Bernie. This is Rob Zako, speaking on my own behalf because Beth has not had a chance in the last 4 working days to review this plan in detail. I've barely had a chance to do it, staying up after midnight last night. I will give you my top 10 list and get as far as I can. Number 1, Randy Pape Beltline Highway from River Road to Coburg Road. At $685 million, this project is too big to fit on the financially constrained list of projects to be constructed in the next 20 years. Rather, it's relegated to the illustrative list of projects not to be built until after 2045. I wonder why we're designing and planning this project right now if we're not going to build it for another generation. Number 2, Main Street Safety Project in Springfield. This is a good project. We support it. It will save lives. It's about $100 million. We're not seeing it in the plan. We're not sure why. Did we miss something? Number 3, interchanges on Highway 126 and I-5. Paul Thompson, Tom Schwetz, and I were all involved in Transplan back in the 1990s, and we're older now. I remember some projects there, an interchange at Highway 126 and Main Street in Springfield, another one at 52nd, and interchanges on Coburg, City of Coburg, and 30th Avenue along I-5. Those projects weren't built in the last generation, so apparently we can get along without them, but they're in this plan still. Haven't things changed in the last generation? Number 3, money for nothing. The RTP proposes to spend most of the funding to benefit drivers, $842 million over the next 20 years, another $1 million on the illustrative list. But after spending all this money, as Kelly indicated, we're going to see travel times increase, congested miles of travel increase, vehicle hours of delay increase, and congestion increase. So we're spending all this money and things are still getting worse. Maybe we could spend the money more smartly. Number 5, bus rapid transit. Back in Transplan, there was a plan to build 60 miles of bus rapid transit, now known as MX. Since then, we've built 3 segments, and that's good. The City of Eugene is looking at one on River Road. Springfield is passing on that. It may be that we're looking at our last MX line, and yet the plan calls for 5 more lines at $65 million each. Who are we to build these for, and where are they going to be? Number 6, Bike Ped Projects. It's good that over $100 million is dedicated to Bike Ped. That sounds like a lot of money, but it's really only $5 million a year. It doesn't sound like a whole lot. Can we invest more in biking and walking? Number 7, mode share. After spending all this money, the plan projects that mode share will stay pretty much the same. About the same number of percentage of people will drive, will walk, will take the bus, will bicycle. It doesn't seem like we're moving in the right direction. Number 8, safety. Going back to the interchange at Highway 126 and Main Street in Springfield, that's 2 blocks from where 3 kids were killed because somebody was driving too fast through a red light. Do we really want to have an overpass interchange there where kids are walking across the street? Maybe we can do better for safety. Number 9, equity. I'm a middle-class white male who can drive. I think most of us are more or less in that category. I'm not seeing where this plan addresses the needs of people who are younger, older, different colored, disabled, or low income. And finally, number 10, climate change. The plan says that it meets the intent of climate change, but there's no mode share. It doesn't seem like people are going to change their travel behaviors. We really need to get people driving less and walking, biking, taking the bus more, or do that. This plan doesn't seem to do that. Overall, and I'll have more detailed comments in writing, I applaud staff. This is a difficult job, and they're doing good work, and nothing I say is intended to be critical of them. They're trying to jump through the hoops that the feds provide for all of us. But frankly, this plan is not that different from the plan that we had 20 years ago in Transplan. It was a plan for the 20th century. This is not a plan for us today. It's a lot of money that's not taking us the direction we need to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Who's next, Paul?
Chair, next on my list is Terry Parker. Terry, if you can and speak, thank you.
Yes, hello, I'm Terry Parker. I'm the Vice Chair of the League of Women Voters of Lane County, although I cannot speak for them, again, for the same reason Rob cited, is that there isn't enough time for the deliberative process that the League does in order to review material and come up with a census-driven decision about how to whether to even make a comment, and then what those comments are included. I would have had this on my agenda yesterday in terms of my action committee meeting, and then the board does not meet until November 7th. I still think a 30-day timeline is too short. I think this is bigger than that, and then it needs a 60-day timeline. And so I'm encouraging you to consider to extend. I'm also concerned about the outreach in terms of notification. I've spoke to you one other time. I got this material through Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. I did not get it through the League, in which we follow transportation issues and have had a long history of understanding what's happening in our community in terms of civic engagement. So again, I think if you are going to build trust in your position as local government, you have to really do additional outreach to communities that are affected. And that includes organizations like the League, as well as equity issues, NAACP and others. And it may be that just a singular mailing isn't enough. So I encourage you to up your game in that regard. I believe that there hasn't been enough thought given to rather than thinking ahead, to thinking back. And so I want us all to put ourselves into the year 2045. Given what we know about climate change today and what the science is telling us and what's happening in Scotland as we speak, is if you look at 2045 and look back at the projects that you're promoting here, and the need to really change the trajectory on emissions in our community, I think you would make different decisions about this plan. So I believe that this is a business as usual plan. It doesn't go far enough to get us to where we need to do our duty and our help to clean up the environment and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our area. The other comment I would make really does have to do with safety. That if we're talking about saving lives, this plan can save lives by truly addressing climate change, and it can save lives by dealing with safety. It just feels like roads as usual. So I'll end my comments there. And again, I appreciate your attention and the ability to check in. Thanks so much. You may be hearing from the League in the future. I'll let you know.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. I assure you, you have our attention. Paul, who would be next?
Chair, next on my list is Webb Sussman.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning to the MPC. My thoughts on this in no particular order are as follows. Funding sources, including bonds that depend on tax revenue or economic activity for repayment, are going through some major shifts. The state doesn't have the resources right now to meet matching requirements for many of the projects listed in this document, including stuff that's not on the financial constraint list. And so I think the organizations involved here need to rethink what their ranking systems mean and what this is all going to mean to us all going forward. Second, the gas tax as a transportation funding source is going away, and in some cases going away much faster than people think. And ODOT and the localities need to figure out how they're going to shift to some kind of new payment structure, and soon. This may be tolling, this may be something totally unforeseen, I'm not sure what, but and it needs to be figured out because it needs to incorporate not just gasoline-powered motor vehicles and trucks, but electric vehicles, electric trucks, a whole variety of different things that are not on the drawing board right now. Number 3, economic and business shifts. Think working from home or remotely. Think this meeting. How many of us actually had to drive down to the county building to attend it? This is going to have major implications on downtown economic development, as well as transportation mode share, demand modeling, planning, etc. This document reflects none of this. In fact, listing long obsolete projects with long time horizons, this plan seems to lock us into obsolescence. And this needs to be changed or addressed. Outreach efforts for this entire process have been missing. This is not the way to do planning and transportation work. As many of you know, I was chair of the Regional Transportation Committee for 2 terms. I was and have been active in the transportation planning process for many years. This is not the way to do business. Outreach efforts for the process have been missing. This has been commented on by others. We're coming into an era where planning cycles need to be accelerated, not slowed. The days when we could make a 20-year plan and execute them over 10 years and then revisit them in 15 are coming to an end. LCOG needs to take a hard look at how they can speed up the work on this planning match process to somewhere between a 2 and 5 year time horizon, not a 20 and 50 year time horizon. Finally, it's completely unacceptable for the planning process that requires public participation to require the public to review and comment on over 300 pages of documentation, which was released to the public in final form in less than 14 days. This process, this is going to sound a little harsh, and I apologize for that in advance, but this process is a farce and should be noted as such. I recognize that Paul's announcement stretches this out another 2 weeks, but even another 2 weeks, especially when you're trying to gather in comment from as diverse an audience as you're trying to attract, including the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, communities that generally don't participate in this process. 2 weeks initial and then 2 weeks added on is not a huge amount of time to gather any public information. Finally, my remarks should not be taken as a criticism of staff. Staff has worked very, very hard on this. The timing required for this process has constrained what they can do. I recognize that they are not the people who have set the timing barriers for this process up. And I want staff to recognize that I recognize the hard work they've done and appreciate the hard work they've done. And with that, I conclude my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yeah.
I believe that although not formally on my list, I believe next would be Sue Walling, if you're willing to speak on this.
Hi, yeah, this is Sue Walling, and sorry I couldn't navigate your system, but anyway, technology has made some amazing advances. So many of you probably drive vehicles that all have all sorts of fancy mirrors and cameras to help you back up safely, and I'm really grateful for that. But as I look over the draft regional transportation plan, I can't help but wondering whether we've gotten a little too good at looking backwards. I haven't reviewed the long plan in detail, and I'm assuming most of you haven't had the time to do that either. But I can't help but notice that the plan allocates by far the largest amount of money, $1 to $2 billion, on road projects for driving, many of them adding lanes, while much smaller amounts are allocated for active transportation. And also that the plan doesn't foresee changing the mode share over the life of the plan. Eugene's Climate Action Plan calls for decreased reliance on automobiles and for tripling the mode share for transit, walking, and bicycling. I can't see how a plan that looks quite similar to plans written over the last 20 years will help us move toward these sustainability goals. So I urge you to take a close look at the plan and insist on a plan that looks forward towards solving the problems of the future and not trying to pave our way out of the problems that have resulted from the way we've done things in the past. Thanks for your time and your service.
Hey, Mayor Smith, this is the time for public comment, and then we're gonna have, okay. Paul, I noticed that Corinne Knudsen's hand is up, and I have no problem extending this public comment period with the okay of the board for anyone that wants to make public comment. So with that, Ms. Knudsen.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney, and thank you, staff, for sharing that link. I do think many people are struggling with trying to figure out how to engage with this public conversation and provide input. So please bear that in mind. I feel similarly to the previous testimony given, in that an enormous amount of information with not nearly enough time to process it and offer you meaningful feedback is probably something that we need to avoid in the future. My name is Karen Knudsen. I'm an architect and urban designer. I'm also the founding director of Better Housing Together, which is a housing advocacy organization based here in Lane County. And I teach in architecture and planning departments at the University of Oregon. I'm not here representing Better Housing Together because we also have not had time to review and discuss this information as a network of partners. However, I will say, as a person who cares deeply about our housing needs and the housing crisis we face, as I know all of you all do as well, that as we're thinking about investments into our transportation system, that we also think about the opportunities before us relative to our development pattern. Our transportation networks and systems exist to serve the needs of our community. They exist to provide access to goods and services and destinations that we all need on a daily basis. And as you are thinking about this work in the context of your broader work leading county and city jurisdictions, please also look at the opportunities before us right now relative to housing, to make sure that the policies that we are working on that are integrated with and inseparable from our transportation concerns are also moved forward with as forward-looking and optimistic and solution-oriented ways as possible. I think very, very specifically, the concerns raised about the need to make sure that this plan is putting significant resources behind active transportation modes, supporting walkable neighborhoods and safety within those walkable neighborhoods, supporting frequent access to transit for as many people within our community as possible. These are the types of actions on the transportation side that mesh with housing solutions that allow us to address our affordability crisis and to mitigate the harms that so many people in this community are experiencing because we have not set up a development pattern or a transportation system that meets their needs. That starts with allocating funding to the projects that they need for us to deliver. And I hope that this work helps us to accomplish that and that there will be time for more public comment on the proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Knudsen. Paul, is there anyone else from the public that would like to make public comment at this time?
Chair, I do not have anybody else listed on my list. I also am not seeing anybody else in the meeting from the public that has not already spoken, but I would ask if there is somebody else, please speak up now.
I hear nothing. So we are going to, I have a question, Paul. With the Board of Commissioners, if we close a public hearing, that closes it. We also, and Commissioner Buck, please make this correct, but we also have the ability to extend public hearings, which speaks to some of the points that have been made. So rather than close the public hearing, let's just right now get questions, comments, and discussions from MPC board members. Is that okay, Paul?
Chair, if I may, the way MPC is operated and the federal guidance has some distinctions between public hearing and public comment period. MPC has typically closed the public hearing. However, the public comment period will remain open through November 30th.
Well, we may want to extend it further. That's what I want to find out from members of the MPC.
And Chair, I was going to add that you have obviously the discretion today to direct staff to extend the public comment period longer than November 30th, and you can open and hold a second, what we would call a second public hearing.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies. So we will close this public hearing. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion from MPC members? I know Mayor Smith had his hand up.
Oh, boy.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with almost all of the comments that were presented by the public. I do have great concern for such a substantial amount of work that I know the staff put a lot of work into. Coburg itself has had the same issues with our outreach and notification process. We've changed an awful lot of things in the last few years due to comment just like what we're getting here. And I think that's an important part of it. One of the issues I tell my planners and developers that are coming in is not to be so concerned with our planning commission or our city council, but be concerned about our citizens because they know what they're doing and what they're talking about. And that's a huge resource for all of us here. And these public testimonies testify to that. I think it is so important that we do this right and we get public input. And I know that it's a mountain of work for staff to look at these things and try to address the federal requirements in reporting. But I just feel like being relatively conservative most of my life, I think it's time to be a lot more progressive with transportation and the global warming issues. I think there was a statement by Bill Gates that I think is an important thing that we need to look at. We need to incentivize new thoughts. We need to push as government agencies. We need to give that incentive to businesses making the new way to do things. Electric cars, alternative transportations like bicycling, walking, nodal living and planning where we don't have to use transportation to get somewhere. We can walk to a grocery store, most of the services that we get to, or bicycle. Those are all parts of this that I think are so important. And I agree that the statement about put yourself in 2045, and if all of these plans, regardless of the revenue, if all of these plans came true, do they answer the real problem that's ahead of us up to 2045? And if I turn around and look back, I look at a lot of these and say, no, we're just building more of the same thing. So I would say that I want to see more time on this. I want to see more public input, more ability for public input. And I think we need to look at building some new notification processes and outreach processes so that we do get that intelligent public out there helping us to build this plan the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. MPC members, many of you have your hands up, so forgive me. I'm just going to go to the upper right corner of my screen where the hands start, and that would be right now Mayor Venus.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I want to just thank you, Mayor Smith, for your comments and for all the comments from the public. I think we all agree this is a huge document. People have not had enough time to review it. We really do want these folks with a lot of expertise and investment in these decisions to have adequate time to talk about it and to review it. And I will also support, you know, what we're trying to do this across the board as we look at climate is how do we shift from business as usual? Like, how do we turn that paradigm around? And so it's troubling to have a list that's been a sort of legacy list of transportation projects that doesn't actually reflect the fact that we actually need to do things differently. So I want to pose a question to staff about this, whether we could have a second public hearing on December 2nd, which is our next meeting, and then postpone any new draft until the new year's, because it sounds like the possible changes could be pretty significant in this document. And doesn't seem fair to staff to think that you could turn that around in 2 weeks. So, and incorporate all those. So I don't remember exactly what the deadline is in terms of our federal requirements, but would like to suggest that for the MPC to consider.
Thank you very much, Mayor Venice. Was there a question there you wanted answered from staff right now?
Well, I think it would be helpful to hear from Paul whether we could postpone it. Could we have a second hearing on December 2nd and postpone a decision on a new draft until the new year, until January? Does the federal timeline allow us to push it out that far?
So, Mayor, let me make a couple of comments, if I may. We certainly can hold a second public hearing in December. And what I would suggest is that after that public hearing, you would, during that meeting, have the option to then consider closing the public comment period during the meeting and adopting, or continuing a public comment period and asking staff to bring back a revised draft for adoption in January. We are under some federal deadlines. We passed the first of those federal deadlines last June, which put us into what is called a conformity lapse period for 1 year. During this period, we are limited in what we can do with federal funds. And to be honest, we cannot proceed with new federal funding projects during this year that we're about in the middle of right now. So far, that has not been a problem for any projects, but there are some projects coming up within the next, I would say 1 to 2, maybe 3 months to the outside that are going to be problematic if we are continuing to be unable to move them forward. And certainly an ultimate deadline would be next June, when the 1 year lapse period expires under the federal rules. If we don't have an adoption by June, we would be in a whole nother series of restrictions. So we can delay 1 more month. It's a little problematic, but not something we can't deal with. The other thing I would like to say at this point, if I can, regarding the project list, because I know some of the public comments, some of what Mayor Venice just said, and other concerns have been around some of the legacy projects and other projects on the RTP project lists. The requirement for the MPO is not so much to determine what projects are on that list. The intent of the federal regional transportation plan, a 24-year long-range regional plan, is to provide the public for the framework of what is looked forward as needed by all of the jurisdictions within the MPO. These projects that are on the list were not determined by the MPO staff or by the MPO advisory committee. They were submitted by the individual jurisdictions, the cities, the counties, LTD, and ODOT. And those projects are projects that your individual jurisdictions asked to have on the regional list, not ones that the MPO placed there. And so, and it's a requirement, to be honest, that the projects that are in your local plans that are either anticipated to use regional funds or are regionally significant, and we'll get into the federal definition of that, but it's required that those projects that are in your local plans that meet those criteria are in this federal plan. So we can't simply take them out without them also being removed from your local plans and no longer being anticipated projects. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, actually, I just want to thank you for saying that, because that was a really, really important clarification, and I appreciate that. But I just did want to reiterate one other thing, which is that, if we have a public hearing and then approve a draft, we are thereby not incorporating anything we've heard in the public hearing into our revised draft, and that is my concern. So that would be my reason for suggesting, if we have a second public hearing, that we not vote on the draft until there's some opportunity to incorporate changes into it.
Thank you, Mayor. And we have several other members that would like to make statements. Yes, Vice Chair Groves.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, and thank you, staff, for the work that you put together. It's a big document. I haven't been able to get all the way through it yet either. And I'd also like to thank members of the public for testifying today. Everything I heard really resonates with me. Likewise with my two colleagues who spoke before me on this. I agree with everything I heard there as well. You know, it's time to look at things differently, but something this complex, something this big, I'm firmly behind extending this out. I recognize we have some deadlines that we need to meet, but at the same time, in order to be transparent and important and reach some of these important groups, I would like to see this pushed out at least to the December meeting, if not further. At the same time, I recognize that there's consequences for our decisions, but I'd also like to see a targeted outreach that is maybe a little more robust and hits some of the groups that were mentioned here today. This work is so incredibly important, and it's important to us that we have adequate time to hear from our community. In addition to the groups that were mentioned today, I would also include some of our business community on this as well. I mean, they have a stake at this. They provide our economy and our jobs, which means people, workers. So I just would like to hear more from a broad cross-section of people before we actually have to make decisions. And I firmly support the second public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Vice Chair. And next, yes, Mayor Van Gordon.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't been able to get my way all the way through this too. And I think I'm going to echo what a lot of people are saying, that we just need to take additional time with this and have another and extend a hearing about it. When I look at the comments, I just want to, I guess, point out that we're talking about a plan that goes to 2045, right? Like, and you know, each of the jurisdictions approaches regional issues a little bit differently. Paul just pointed out a point that some of these projects have to end up on this list anyway, right? So we've got to find some balance with it between a desire to sort of do this differently and prioritize things differently, and a balance with the sort of nuts and bolts about how all these plans sort of work together. And to me, that just means, like, I'm behind doing things differently, right? Like, we just have to paint with on a 25-year plan, we have to paint with a really broad brush and give ourselves some options. These are the long-term plans that, you know, we're going to get 10 years into it and a different combination is going to come up that we need to work towards. So I want to acknowledge that we've got to find the balance there. Other than that, I think we need to take more time with it.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with all the previous speakers, but I wanted to point out something that came to me throughout this discussion here, is that it sounds like there's some systemic issues at play that brought us to this particular point. One of which is the plans from the different jurisdictions. If these are not plans for our future, it makes us question the plans in each of our own transportation documents, and if they are really what we want. But that's a whole process in and of itself within each jurisdiction. In addition to that, it sounded like from Paul that something happened in June that put us in this period. And I'm guessing because of COVID and other issues that this may have been presented earlier to us. If possible, that would have been able to extend this timeline for public comment a little bit longer naturally. If I'm wrong, Paul, please let me know. But it sounds like this is coming to us maybe later than normal, or it could have come to us earlier if there had been other circumstances at play.
Commissioner, that was a question, correct? Yes. Go ahead, Paul.
So yes, Commissioner, there were several reasons, and let me step through a little bit of what happened here. What happened in June was that June of 2021 marked 4 years since the last time we had an accepted RTP and air quality conformity determination. So in other words, our 4-year window for getting the next update done expired in June of this year. When that happens, you're given a 1-year grace period, a further year to accomplish the update. But there are some initial restrictions that are placed on the MPO during that grace period. And like I said, that essentially means that we can't make use of new federal funds. We can still proceed during this year with federal funds that were already programmed, that were already in the pipeline. We just can't put new federal projects, new federal funds in the pipeline during this year. We faced several things during the past 2+ years that we've been working on this project in terms of the timeline taking longer than we thought. One was COVID. To be honest, it was more difficult to engage in some of the work and some of the public engagement. For instance, our modeling, which is done up at Portland Metro, took longer than expected, and part of that was due to the fact that Portland Metro laid off 40% of their staff during the pandemic. We also have faced issues with, and I'm going to be very honest here, with the timely provision of drafts and materials from our consultant team. We have worked with them over the past, especially 6 months or so. They have recognized, the consultant team, that they have missed deadlines, and we have done everything we can to push them to produce this draft that's before you today. It is later than staff wanted or anticipated, but they had issues with capacity at the consulting team, and that led to delays on their end in producing significant portions of this draft plan. What happens during this year, again, with not being able to move new federal funding forward, is that, as I mentioned earlier, so far it hasn't impacted any projects, but in trying to keep track of those projects that will need to move forward, there are some projects that would like to move forward in the January-February timeline. And so that's why we're hoping to have this adoption done and the federal acceptance done in the January-February timeline at the very latest, so that there's not further delays to those projects.
Commissioner Buck, did you have any follow-up to that, or was that?
No, I suspected something was going on, and this is not an unfamiliar story for many government agencies on a large, wide array of work that we have been working on during the pandemic, and they're all getting postponed because of similar issues. So I do want to respect that staff was trying really hard to get this to us earlier, and now we're kind of stuck in this timeline situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, Paul?
I'm sorry, Chair. Just one final comment on that. Commissioner, I appreciate that comment. And as a matter of fact, about 2 months ago, we have had throughout this entire process regular meetings with our federal oversight team from Federal Highways and Federal Transit. And about 2 months ago, when we let them know of the latest delay, the response, and that, to be honest, we told them that we were having delays from the consultant team. Their immediate response in that meeting was, "We're hearing that a lot. The consultants are just backed up, and we feel your pain on that."
Okay, thank you, Paul. Yes, Ms. Brindle.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with all of the comments from the public and my other members of the MPC. I reviewed the document very briefly, quickly as possible before the meeting. And a couple things stood out to me. One is that there was extensive efforts to reach out to committees and even other government agencies that were on the list of people that would review and comment on this document. But what I didn't see was the Lane Area Commission on Transportation listed, or the Lane County Roads Advisory Committee. And both of those committees, I think, are very important to have some outreach about this plan too. The other thing I noticed in the future trends is the fact that we just completed a census for 2020. And so the population was talked about, growing a population, but my understanding is that the census data could affect the MPO boundaries. And that wasn't even mentioned in this document. And I think that that was an oversight. But those are my only comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before we start what might be the beginning of a second round with Mayor Smith, Councillor Moe, I couldn't tell. Were you trying to wait that you want? No.
No, I'm trying to read. I'm trying to read the document at the same time we're discussing it. So I'm terribly sorry.
Oh, no. I think sadly, many of our comments are indicating we're all in that boat. Yes, Mayor Smith.
I just want to quickly share that this is like Groundhog Day for me. It's a deja vu. For the city of Coburg, we were in the middle of updating our TSP. We have a population of less than 5,000, so we're not required to have a TSP, but we've always had one that has helped us and worked with us. As we went through it and tried to get numbers and things from outside agencies or consultants, it took so long to get some of the stuff that as we moved along, the public input was a lot like what we're hearing here today is this isn't working. We've got some things that we want to say or do with this. And we literally got to the point with Coburg where we just stopped. We are able to do that. I know MPC isn't. MPO has to get that in for all the obvious reasons. But I'm just echoing the issues that Paul is talking about and what we are seeing. We just couldn't get information to modernize our TSP in a decent amount of time. So we just stopped. And COVID has a lot to do with that, I know. So I just want to echo that and also throw some support in on staff and the work that they are doing, and recognizing this isn't a criticism of that, but I think it's an awakening for all of us to look at our outreach and our communication for these types of processes in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this? I think it's pretty clear the input we're providing staff, but is there anyone else that would like to speak to this? I would like to echo in my own way everything that's been stated. I'm completely in support of it. I think that we're in a difficult moment, and either we ignore it or we dig in and try and make things better as a result of it. Whenever I talk, this is what happens. Sorry about that. And by the way, I don't have a life plan that gets me to 2045, but I will aspire to that. One, I think it is critical we continue and give more time for public input and a second public hearing. And I think it's critical that whatever input that comes from that, if it's going to be considered, it means we're not going to vote at our December meeting on this. I think that's pretty clear. Number two, I think it's pretty clear that we as an entity might want to rethink how we engage or outreach to the public, and might want to expand our notion of who critical constituencies are as it relates to this. Not only have some organizations been named, but I think Vice Chair Groves mentioned that there's a thing out there called the business community that provides employment and is as concerned with transportation as anyone. So I completely echo that. I also echo the notion that if we are to get to a net zero lane county by 2045, we might look at a net zero transportation plan by 2045. And as I think Mayor Smith and others articulated far more eloquently than I, that's a lens that it may take some time understanding to a degree. This is the aggregation of local plans, local municipal plans, as Commissioner Buck pointed out. And I understand all that, but this might also be a moment that we rethink how we amalgam them in such a way that there is consistency and forward looking as it relates to the emissions of our county and this aspect of our county's economic activity. So to the staff, I echo appreciation and criticism and understanding that the moment is just full of conflicting messages right now. We're all struggling with that. So that's my 2 cents. I think it's consistent, and I think, Paul, you and your staff could not have a more consistent message from this body. Is that correct, or do you need any other questions answered at this time?
Chair, thank you. If I may, I've got 2 comments and then a summary of what I'm hearing in response to what you just asked. Real quick, I just want to let people know, since Franny mentioned the census information, the MPO does not yet have any information from the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau actually goes through a process that, in addition to what the public generally sees as the census information, there's a separate process that produces a subset of information specifically for MPOs throughout the country with respect to our boundaries and other things. That has not been published at all. As a matter of fact, they're still updating the guidance and the new rulemaking for what MPOs will have to do in response to the 2020 census. So there was nothing we could do with respect to this RTP as a result of the 2020 census. That'll have to be reflected in the next RTP. Second, I wanted to mention, I spent some time talking earlier about how projects on the project list are an amalgamation of the local plans, and that's really what is the requirement of the MPOs. The place where this body really also has even more influence, though, is in determining how it uses its $5 or $6 million or more of annual MPO funding that it can program for projects. As an example, we have a new federal transportation bill that hopefully will be authorized as part of the infrastructure bill that Congress currently has before it. That's going to increase our federal MPO funding by a substantial amount, around 1/3. It's also going to add some new pots of funding to MPOs around the country. One of them is a carbon reduction pot of funding. As that bill gets reauthorized, and as we then, as the Central Lane MPO, move into the next round of competitive funding grants for the MPO funds, we will come to you and we will ask you to set the priorities for how those funds should be used and to set the criteria for what projects should apply and what they have to demonstrate in their applications for the MPO's funding. That is where you can start maybe moving the needle in the short term in terms of saying, we want to fund climate friendly projects. We want to fund whatever it is you may direct. In response to what I'm hearing from the committee today, Chair Bernie, what I would like to just put out there as a proposal is this. I would like to suggest that we extend the public comment period through December 10th. And I am picking December 10th because that would allow staff time after it closes to consider all the public comments and prepare the draft packet for the January MPC meeting, considering that there'll be some holiday time and gaps in there. I would like to propose that within that public comment period through December 10th, there would be a second public hearing scheduled for your December 2nd MPC meeting. And also, to be honest, what I would like to ask your permission is that for the December 2nd packet, we produce a slightly smaller packet that has a memo that summarizes any potential changes to the draft, but doesn't necessarily result in another 1,000 pages.
I don't see anyone against not reading another 1,000 pages. Is there anyone that disagrees with what Paul has just proposed? It seems like your proposal sort of integrates the input you just received, and from what I'm getting from screens and heads shaking, that sounds good. Okay, we're going to move on. I don't know if we contain that to 60 minutes or not. I just sent a text to the vice chair that I don't think we're going to end this meeting early, so get ready because I have to leave for an interview at 1:15. Item D, follow-up and next steps. 1, ODOT update. Ms. Brindle, I believe this is you.
Hello, yes. Couple things. We are going to have a Lane Act meeting next Wednesday.
Oh, I see.
We're going to be talking about the engagement with the OTC and the Act refocus efforts. There's been quite a lot of effort done to that with the Oregon Transportation Commission and ODOT. There was a meeting with the ACT chairs statewide and input received at that meeting. We're going to be talking about how the formation policy for the ACTs is going to be updated, but just a couple high level things for your information is that it's revising the roles of the ACT, OTC, and ODOT and clarifying those roles. And then we're going to be talking about that at the ACT meeting, reviewing those changes. And then those changes and comments are coming back from all the ACT statewide. And that will go into a final draft for OTC approval. And then afterwards, they'll be implementing a new work plan and charter template for all the ACTs to use if they choose to, or do something similar. So that's coming, and we'll be talking about that at the Lane Act. And then the last thing is Connect Oregon. The application deadline is passed. The process for reviewing and prioritizing those projects is underway. There are 4 projects within Lane County that are being considered. And in the MPO, there's a project at the Eugene Airport that's going to be considered. What will happen is that the ACT Area Commission Transportation will rank those projects for the county in January-ish. And then in February, late February, early March, the Region 2 and all 4 ACT chairs will get together and rank them for the region. And the region has 15 projects currently. Now that's a little premature because they haven't all gone through the application review, but this is the estimate of how many projects that we're seeing that will be ranked. And then that list of ranked projects goes before the OTC later in the spring. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank you and point out that Franny is so good that I screwed up and I missed agenda item 6C, but nonetheless, Franny, thank you. You just made it look smooth. You were ready. I apologize, everyone. I really do. I'm going to back up. Item 6C is the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan, Air Quality Conformity Determination. And my understanding again is that the staff presenter will be Ms. Kelly Clark. Kelly, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's quite all right. And this item is tied to the last agenda item with the RTP and CMD project, but we did include it as a separate item because it requires a public hearing and eventually a standalone resolution that we'll send to our federal partners. And Paul has talked about this in the last agenda item, but the Air Quality Conformity Determination, or AQCD, for the 2045 RTP is required because years ago in 1987, the Eugene Springfield area did not meet the National Air Ambient Air Quality Standards. We were redesignated in 2013 by the Environmental Protection Agency to attainment, which means that we do meet the air quality standards. But as part of this redesignation, And as part of the redesignation, the MPO has a plan in place called a limited maintenance plan. And that plan ensures that we monitor and report on air quality and that our plans and projects do not contribute to air quality deterioration. And the pollutant that we monitor is coarse particulate matter, or PM10. So while the limited maintenance plan does find that a major source of PM10 in our region was from home wood pollution and heating and industrial sources, we're still committed to evaluating our plans and projects to meet the air quality standards. So we've worked with our Lane Regional Protection Agency, LRAPA, who provided us with the PM10 data, or air quality data, from their monitoring stations, and find that our region's air quality does continue to meet our clean air standards. The AQCD report indicates what it does is for every project in the RTP, it indicates a planning level assessment of whether or not each project will need to be further evaluated when we go into scoping and design for them and construction. And then the next phase of the AQCD happens when a project from the RTP that will potentially increase vehicular capacity and increased emissions is funding. And again, at that time, they'll go through another review and possible analysis. So the region itself doesn't go through a regional air quality analysis as a project by project basis. MPO staff met with our federal and state partners and what's called an interagency consultation. And we had that meeting September 30th, 2021. And we've integrated the comments and feedback from our agency experts. They were minor in nature, and they're in the packet, the report that you have in your packet. And then this report will follow the same schedule as the RTP and CMP. And so we'll be, unless Paul has a different proposal, but I would just anticipate that it would follow the same adoption schedule as the RTP.
Thank you very much. My understanding is, even though this is connected, you're going to need a separate action, and we're also going to have a separate, right now, public hearing. So, Paul, is there any public comments that you're aware of anyone would like to make at this time on this issue?
Chair, there is no one that has notified me they wish to speak on the air quality public hearing.
In that case, we will close the public hearing. And are there any questions or comments or discussion from MPC members? Seeing and hearing none, Ms. Clark, do you need anything other than feedback at this time? I think your feedback.
Not at this time.
I think your feedback is go forth.
Thank you.
And I will agree and support what Kelly indicated. Although this is a separate action, it is absolutely linked to the RTP action. The air quality conformity determination has to be for the adopted RTP and the projects in it. So really, we will have to schedule them together, and that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, and thank you for continuing to provide clarification. It's greatly appreciated. I'm going to lean on you, sir. I think now I jump back to item 6D. Ms. Brindle gave her report. So are we now on, is that correct?
Chair, no, I mentioned that there was a new agenda item added just this morning.
Yeah, you did. I'm sorry.
For that item. So the city of Eugene has requested I'll call it a tentative letter of support for a pending application that the city is considering putting in. And we have Rob Interfeld from the city of Eugene with us to speak to this. So Rob, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Paul. So again, I'm Rob Interfeld, Transportation Planning Manager for the city of Eugene. We are considering applying for a grant from the Federal Rail Administration. It's a grant program called CRISI, which stands for Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. And so to tell you the story, a few years ago, the city of Eugene received a grant through the MPO to build sidewalks on Prairie Road and Maxwell Road between Highway 99 and the Maxwell Bridge over Northwest Expressway. Prairie is a city street, Maxwell's a county road. That Prairie crosses the railroad tracks, which are owned by Portland and Western Railroad. And I actually just learned today that the land underneath them is owned by a much larger railroad, BNSF. The railroad, BNSF in particular, we just want to build a sidewalk outside of the gate arms, which is pretty standard in terms of how sidewalks across railroad tracks look and how they are in space. However, the railroad is basically requiring us to completely rebuild the rail crossing at a cost of around $1 million. I think ODOT is willing to help bring that cost down with some funding they have available to us, but there's still a huge funding gap for us in order to build this connection. And one thing to keep in mind is that this is the only surface street connection between the Bethel neighborhood in Eugene and the River Road neighborhood in Eugene. I don't know if you can throw up on the screen, Paul, that little snippet from Google Maps that I sent you earlier, or the photo, just to give folks a sense of what this looks like. So it's a very critical pedestrian connection between these two neighborhoods. We're also trying to figure out how to get bicycle facilities in as well. And this grant program is one way that we can potentially fund the reconstruction of the rail crossing. We're still trying to figure out if our project would be a good fit for the grant program. It's eligible, but it just might not be competitive. So that's one of the reasons why we're not 100% deciding to move forward, because it's a lot of work to put a grant application together. But it always helps to have a letter of support from the MPC for these kinds of applications. Paul, are you able to throw that up on the screen at all?
Rob, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I understood you were doing the presentation. I made you a co-host. If you can share it.
Oh, that's okay. I'm not on the, it'll just take me too long. So I think most folks are probably familiar with the area that we're talking about. I mean, if it's really important to any MPC members that we do that, I can do that. So are there any questions? Oh, I guess the other thing I should let you know is the grant application is due November 29th. And I think that's the other key thing I wanted to tell you.
Well,
thank you, Paul. So there's the crossing. Sorry, Commissioner Burney, were you saying something?
No, I'm trying to move this along. My understanding is you'd like a letter of support. Is that correct?
Right. Or at least, like Paul said, we may not need it, but we'd like to be able to request it, the MPC to approve it, and then we'll draft something up if it turns out we're applying.
So, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, what we're asking for is for MPC to approve you signing a letter of support for this grant should the city prepare one.
Do I hear a motion?
I move.
Steve Moe moves what Paul Thompson said. Yeah, is that how we're doing this? Paul, would you repeat the motion?
Authorizing the chair to sign a letter of support for the City of Eugene grant applications should they prepare one.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second? Mayor Smith seconds. Is there discussion to the motion? You got to forgive me, Mr. Is it Interfeld? Is that how I pronounce it? BNSF used to be one of my clients. And so I was going through my old emails looking at, okay, who the heck won't even help support this? Because those guys have lots of money. But regardless, that's not really relevant discussion to the motion. If there's no other discussion to the motion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Let the record show. Mr. Interfeld, you got it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, am I allowed to move to what was item 6D? I suppose it's item 6E2 at this point, Paul?
Yes, Chair. And I'll just, if I may, quickly say that this is the standard MTIP Administrative Amendments information attachment. If there's no questions or comments It's just in there for your information.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, is there any? Well, what do you know, Vice Chair? We might not need to do this transition. Are there any MPC members or staff that have input beyond what we've already provided on the next or future agendas? Anyone? It looks to me like, other than announcing our upcoming meetings, December 2nd, virtual, do we know January 6th and February 3rd will be virtual? Are we assuming that? Or we?
Chair, that is the assumption until we receive direction otherwise, but our agency is not returning to the office yet. I don't have a direction otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all so much. This meeting is adjourned. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.